Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. A very warm welcome to yet another session of Weekend with Wisdom. Today we have with us Shri James Boag, who is uh, currently residing in Tiruvannamalai as of today for some time now. And we look forward to have you all in today's Weekend with Wisdom. Let me begin with a prayer. वक्रतुण्ड महाकाय कोटिसूर्यसमप्रभा निर्विघ्नं कुरु मे देव सर्वकार्येषु सर्वदा ॐ जयन्ती मङ्गलाकाली भद्रकाली कपालिनी दुर्गा क्षमा शिवा धात्री स्वाहा स्वधा नमोऽस्तु ते ईश्वरो गुरुरात्मेति मूर्तिभेदविभागिने व्योमवद्व्याप्तदेहाय श्रीदक्षिणामूर्तये नमः सदाशिवसमारम्भां शङ्कराचार्यमध्यमाम् अस्मदाचार्यपर्यन्तां वन्दे गुरुपरम्परां श्रीगुरुभ्यो नमः हरि ओम् Once again, Shubhodaya and a warm welcome to everyone. Today's Weekend with Wisdom will be on a very interesting topic, leaving the Yoga Sutras. So, it will be a theoretical and practical presentation on and experiential presentation on Yoga Sutras by Sri James Bogji. Thank you, James Ji, for making time for this session. We are very pleased to have you on our program. Just a brief introduction. Sri James has been passionately sharing whole life yoga across 3 continents for the last 2 decades, working with sound and song, movement and meditation, story and inquiry, practical philosophy, and study of the classic Samskrita yoga texts. James' programs invite nourishment and vitality to all parts of an individual as he facilitates inquiry into the reality of being human. Deeply rooted in the teachings of Shankaracharya, in the Kashmiri Shaiva traditions, and other Samskrita traditions, James' work breathes vibrant life into the timeless wisdom of yoga. With a background in different languages and literature, and having lived in several countries, James brings the perennial wisdom of Indic tradition to vivid life in the context of our contemporary world today. Again, James, very warm welcome to you, and we all look forward to your unique perspective on Yoga Sutras and on leaving the Yoga Sutras. Please go ahead and start your session. Viewers, if you have any questions, please put it in Q&A box. Last 5 to 10 minutes, James G will take some of them. Please go ahead, James.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Nitin. Just before good morning, namaste, everybody. Maybe some people are joining from different time zones, so namaste, welcome. Thank you for inviting me, Indika and Nitin. It's a great pleasure to be sharing on this topic. And thank you for that beautiful invocation. I'd also, as we're going to be speaking about Yoga Sutra, I would like to sing, perhaps together, an invocation to Patañjali and the Gurus. So I'm going to see if we can put this up on the screen. On the screen, you can see we have invocatory verses to the Gurus and Patañjali. So I'll sing this, so feel free to join in, and then we'll continue from there. Om Vande Guru Nam Sharanarvinde Sandarshita Svatma Sukhava Bhuti Nishriyase Jangalika Yamani Samsara Halamo Shantyai Abahu Purushakaram Shankha Chakra Siddharinam Sahasra Shirasam Shvetam Pranamami Patanjalim Yogina Chittasya Parina Vacham Malam Sharirasya Chavaidyakinam Yopakarotam Bravaram Muninam Patanjalim Pranjaliranatosmi Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Phunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So once again, namaste. Welcome everybody. So today, it's always a privilege, I feel, to dive into the exploration of what I consider an amazing miracle mirror text, which is Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. So when I refer to it as a miracle mirror text, what do I mean? The idea is that basically every time we look into it, it can reveal something fresh. It can give us practical, useful guidance relative to where we find ourselves today. So sometimes we might read a book, maybe a story book, and we enjoy the story and we pass that book along to somebody else. Oh, this was a great read. I think my friend might enjoy it. So that's one type of book. But the Yoga Sutra is not that type of book. It's not a book that we read once, then, oh, I've read it in the past simple tense. It's not that we spend a little bit of time with the Yoga Sutra and then we say, oh, I studied the Yoga Sutra in the past simple tense. No, the idea is that we have studied the Yoga Sutra and we've read it when we become established in the state of yoga and we experience that oneness and we experience ourselves as connected with everything. But until then, we can keep reading it, we can keep studying it, we can keep referring to it, and we can keep looking into it for its miraculously practical guidance. So the Yoga Sutra is quite a well-known text. Sometimes when people begin to experience the beauty and power of various yoga practices, perhaps they encounter yogasana or they learn to meditate. And one thing that often happens is when people start to explore a body of practice, people start to notice, this yoga is affecting many aspects of my life. And so it's altogether natural that stimulates our curiosity. We might want to find out more about this amazing thing called yoga. And if we go to a bookshop and we look for a book with yoga in the title, we might come across the Yoga Sutra. And the Yoga Sutra, of course, is one of the most central or foundational texts in the Yoga Shastra. Along with the Bhagavad Gita, for example, it may be considered the most core text of the yoga tradition. Now, some might say that's a slightly controversial statement, but the Yoga Sutra is the text that distills all of the time-proven, practical foundational teachings of yoga into this concise Shastra form. And it does it using the Sutra form. So as we're going to be talking about this amazing Sutra text, I think it might be appropriate just for a couple of moments to consider the classic definition of a sutra. Now, I grew up in England, and I also studied French and Italian when I was quite young. And I studied literature in those three languages. But when I came to Sanskrit, I realized that in the Sanskrit literature and in the Sanskrit language, there are possibilities that we don't have in most other languages. And the sutra form, because of the versatility of Sanskrit grammar, it allows a level of concision that cannot really be replicated in English or French or Italian, for example, or many other languages. So I'm going to put up on the screen the classic definition of a Sanskrit sutra, and we'll just have a look at this together. Oh, wait a minute. There it is. So here is a shloka that describes a sutra. And it says, Alpaksharam asandigdam saravat vishwato mukham astobham anavadyancha sutra viro viduhu. So in the Sanskrit tradition, we find plenty of clear classification. And this is the clear classification of a sutra. So sutra viduhu, those who know sutras, this is how they describe sutras. First, alpaksharam. So alpa means little, few. So having few sounds, having few phonemes. In other words, being ultra concise, ultra distilled. So when we consider, for example, the Bhagavad Gita as a foundation text of Yoga Shastra, the Gita is 700 verses. It's already very condensed. And the Bhagavad Gita is considered to be the essence or the distillation of all of the Upanishadic wisdom. But when we come to the sutra form, we find it's even more distilled, even more condensed. So it's using the minimum number of sounds, but at the same time, it's asandigdam. It's not ambiguous. So it's still very clear, even though it's ultra condensed. Saravat. It's getting to the sara, to the essence. And it has an essential quality. So there's nothing superfluous in the Yoga Sutra text. Now, this is very important to note, because here and there, when we look at the Yoga Sutra text, we might notice, Patanjali seems here to have used more syllables than might strictly be necessary. And Patanjali is considered within the tradition as one of the greatest exponents ever of the Sanskrit language. So this is very telling. If it appears that there are some extra syllables being used, there is a purpose for that. So sometimes when there is something that is said that seems like it's just adding something that maybe isn't really the sara, the essence, that's a very clear indication. We need to pay special attention here because Patanjali is emphasizing something of great practical import. And we'll see a couple of examples of that later on. So it needs to be concise, clear, and getting to the essence of things. And the last word of the first line, this beautiful Sanskrit word, vishwato mukha, vishwato mukham. So mukha means mouth or face, and vishwataha means all around. So even though the sutra is to be ultra condensed, distilled, clear and unambiguous, getting to the essence of things, at the same time, it should face in all directions. In other words, a sutra is like a lighthouse. Wherever we are on our journey, if we consider life as a journey on this ocean of existence, wherever we find ourselves on that journey, the sutra can always speak to us in a clear, practical, essential way. So the sutra shines its light out in all directions. And this goes back to this idea I mentioned earlier of the sutra being a miracle mirror text. Here I am today, and I'm feeling like this, and I look into the text, it gives me a certain type of guidance. Another day, I might be feeling a particular type of challenge in my life. I look into the text, and it gives me a different perspective. I can see something that I might not have seen before. And as practice and life continues, when I keep referring to the distilled wisdom of the text, it can keep giving me guidance. It keeps shining out its light. If I take the practical steps to look into it, if I'm on the sea and I've got my eyes closed and I've put a blindfold over my eyes, I won't be able to benefit from the guidance of the lighthouse. So anytime I make myself open and available to the practical guidance of the sutra text, I can enjoy and benefit from the way it shines out this practical meaning in so many different directions. And before we kind of just close this brief comment on Vishwatomakam, another idea here that's very important. Today, our topic is living the Yoga Sutra, and we've just basically got an hour together to explore this vast topic. last year, I had the privilege of sharing a 60-hour course on this same theme where we worked through the Yoga Sutra text. And we could have easily made it a 600-hour course because the sutra is so practical. In some ways, it can be considered a user's guide to a human life. And to study the text traditionally means to study it in the context of our own ongoing life, our own ongoing sadhana. And so sometimes people ask me, can you recommend a good translation of the Yoga Sutra? And there are many wonderfully meritorious translations and interpretations available. But what I always take care to mention is that the sutra ultimately isn't to be translated in a definitive way, because there will be multiple valid interpretations, and they can all be valid at the same time, because the sutra has the capacity to give different tones or different layers, different aspects of practical guidance to different seekers at different times, and to the same seeker at different times and in different circumstances. So we'll find as we look into the text, this beautiful Vishwatomukha quality. It's always shining its light out in all directions. Wherever we approach from, it can help us relative to where we find ourselves. Now, the very first word of the Yoga Sutra is, as many of you may be aware, Atha. And this Atha can be translated as now, but it's not any old now. It's and now something has happened. And what is this something that has happened? One way we can interpret this Atha is that, and now I have recognized that I am not in yoga. I am not in that state that I would actually like to be in. We'll come back. I'll just mention before, I'll take the screen share down. So just before we'll come back to Atha in a moment. But as well as being ultra distilled, essential, unambiguous, shining its light out in all directions, the sutra should also be astobam, having nothing superfluous, no fillers. Anavadyam, it should be solid. It should be proven. It should be thoroughly proven in the furnace of time before it gets set down in the sutra. And so it is with Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. Patanjali doesn't ask us to believe anything. Everything he sets forth is for us to explore and put to the test in the arena of our own experience. But how will this experience begin to unfold? So as mentioning, the first word of the text is Atha, and now. Now I have recognized that I am not in the state of yoga. Now I've seen, apprehended, understood that I don't really know. Now, I've already mentioned briefly the Bhagavad Gita, and many people, including me, hold the position that the Yoga Sutra and the Bhagavad Gita are really setting forth the same yoga in a different flavor, in a different presentation, but presentations that are very complementary. Where is the Bhagavad Gita set? On the battlefield. Dharma kshetra, Kurukshetra, the field of dharma and the field of action, the field of human experience, in which it's altogether normal, natural, predictable that sometimes we will feel ourselves pulled in different directions. We will feel ourselves in a state of internal conflict. And when we start to practice yoga and we start to examine the reality of the field of our psyche and our interior reality, we may notice that we harbor tendencies that don't quite always sit together so cohesively. And we can find ourselves pulled in different directions. There's a beautiful subhashita, which means a wise saying, words of wisdom, in the Sanskrita. And it says, Manasyekam vachasyekam karmanyekam mahatmana. Manasyanyat vachasyanyat karmanyanyat duratmana. What does it mean? Manasyekam vachasyekam karmanyekam mahatmana. One whose manas, whose mind, whose thoughts, vachas, whose speech and expression, karma, whose actions are ekam, are one, that is a mahatmana, that is a great soul. But a person whose thought is in one place, whose words and expression is saying something else, and whose actions are demonstrating something else again, this is duratmana, this is a soul in torment. Is this true? I think so. And I've experienced this being torn, this being split, and it doesn't feel so great. And yet, as a human being, I have also had these glimpses, these moments in my life where I feel together. I feel joined up. I feel at one. And there is no split or schism between my thought, my word, and my action. And that feels wonderful. And not only does it feel wonderful, there's something striking about that experience of oneness, even if we only get fleeting glimpses of it here and there. According to the Upanishads and the understandings of the great Upanishadic rishis, those who saw the subtle layers of reality, one way that ultimate reality is described is as Sat, Chit, Ananda. Sat, it's real, it is, it exists, and it's true in the sense that it's real. Chit, it's conscious, and Ananda. Now, Ananda often gets translated by English words like bliss, but I find a helpful way to consider Ananda is if we consider Nanda. Nanda means child. It also means joy. Ananda means without child, less than joy, other than joy, different from joy, joyless. So Nanda and Ananda, it's like a pair of opposites, joy and sorrow. But Ananda is the state of fullness, wholeness, oneness, that's beyond the pairs of opposites, that's beyond hot, cold, pleasure, pain, and all these comings and goings. And according to the Upanishadic rishis, according to the people who gave us the yoga tradition, who birthed it, or who brought it to life, you might say, ultimately, that is our nature too. Okay, Sat Chit Ananda. What do we think of this definition of our ultimate essential reality? Sat, okay, I am. I do have the experience, I am. If I have the illusion of the experience, I am not, well, then how could I have an experience at all if I was not here? So Sat, we can tick that box. We can say, yes, that checks out. Sat, I am, I exist. And Chit, while consciousness may be in some ways a great mystery, if I'm having an experience at all, then Chit checks out too, because I have some consciousness to have the experience of I am. So Sat Chit, yes, the Upanishadic definition of ultimate reality and my essential nature, it's going very well. Third part of the definition, Ananda, wholeness beyond dualities, a sense of completion, totality beyond all desire. Now, I don't know about you, even though I am feeling tremendously grateful and blessed to be staying in a wonderfully supportive environment close to the magnificent Arunachala mountain just outside Tiruvannamalai. And I'm so enjoying being here. Even here, when I wake up in the morning, I do not experience myself, all my surroundings, and everything beyond as one field of shimmering unity. I still feel differentiation and separation. So, do I throw away this Upanishadic definition of ultimate reality? I do not. And why not? Because of those glimpses that I have had in those moments of my very human life in which I naturally experience the pairs of opposites, the comings and goings of hot and cold, agreeable and not so agreeable, pleasant and not so pleasant, expansion and contraction. Even though I experience these natural pulsations in the cycles of manifest natural life, as a human being, nonetheless, here and there, I've had these glimpses of totality. Sometimes I remember in my childhood, a couple of times when I was about 11 years old, I was playing tennis and I got so immersed in the game, everything else fell away. There was only the ball and I was totally into it. And I experienced this blissfulness that was beyond any type of general happiness. Sometimes as a young child, I remember being just totally captivated by the beauty of the sun-setting sky. And in these moments, it's like, again, everything else fell away and I was fully in the present moment. And when I had those moments where my thought, my word, and my action were all in a state of cohesion, I was fully congruent. I was fully joined up. I was at one. In those moments, the experience of blissful wholeness, it's very striking. That experience was not accompanied by a thought like, what is this strange feeling of oneness and wellness? No, it just felt like home. It did not feel foreign. It felt like some kind of deep remembering or recognizing or coming home. And so part of what this first word of the Yoga Sutra, Atha, suggests is that now I have recognized that here in this amazing bodily vehicle as a human being, I'm not quite as at home as I could be. Because somehow I sense I do have this deeper capacity for oneness and integration. Also in the Upanishads, another beautiful threefold definition of our ultimate reality and our essential nature, similar to Satchidananda, is Satya Rita Brihat. So Satya, just like Sat, it means isness, true, real, existence. And here we are. We've already said, yes, we can agree with that. What does Rita mean? Now, Rita is one of these beautiful Sanskrit words that's not so easy to translate into English. But nonetheless, the Sanskrit word Rita is the root of the English words rhythm and rite. R-I-T-E, like a ritual, and also R-I-G-H-T, like when something is right, in order, is appropriate, is correct. And brihat means vast. And so the beautiful idea encoded here, or one of the beautiful ideas encoded here, is that when we bring ourselves into true, authentic rhythm, then we will unveil and recognize the vastness that is our essence, the vastness that is all-inclusive, in which we experience this underlying oneness and unity. But in order to do that, we have to come into rhythm, authentic rhythm. And when we're a human being, we exist in this realm of nature. As human beings, we are nature. We are not separate from it. We are born, we will die. And in between those two great changes, we will experience constant change. This is the nature of manifest existence. This is the nature of Prakriti, as it's sometimes referred to in the Sanskrit. And when we exist in the realm of manifest nature, we are constituted of the building blocks of manifest existence, sometimes known as the tattvas or the gunas. So tat means that which is, and tva having the quality of exist. So tattva having the quality of existing. Guna, the constituent parts of the group of all that is. So I'm going to put on the screen now another visual for a moment, which I'll refer to as the Sankhya model of existence. And yoga works with this map, this model of our incarnate natural field of experience. So it's a yellow sheet, and you'll see it says Tattvas Gunas. This is the Sankhya Yoga map of our being. So we'll just look at it from today, to save time, we'll just look from the gross to subtle, from the bottom up. So we'll see that the field of our experience And the field in which we exist is encoded here by this beautiful map. So as beings that exist in the realm of nature, we are constituted of the Panchamahabhutaha, the 5 great things that have become earth, water, fire, air, and space. Again, this checks out. Yes, there is an earthy part to my experience. There's also a liquidy part. I was told at school I was about 70% water. The blood, sweat, tears of life are testament to this. Maybe you've had some food today. The internal fire is transforming, digesting, assimilating that food. So we might not have naked flames inside our body, but we do have fire. We do have an internal combustion engine. Air is moving in and out, and we exist in space. So this is very much part of our reality. And these Panchamahabhutaha, they correspond to the Tanmatraha. Tan is the same as Tat, but the final T changes to N before the M. So Tanmatraha, matra, they're the things that can be measured. So these are the portions, or slightly, the portions of the field of existence that basically we have evolved to be able to perceive. So we experience earth, water, fire, air, and space through the associated sense experiences of fragrance, taste, form, touch, and sound. This is how we make sense of our reality. And we make sense of our reality through these 10 powers called indriyaha. The karmindriyaha, the powers of karma, action and doing, and the jnanindriyaha, the powers of knowing and perceiving. So here we have the 5 sense powers of hearing, touch, sight, taste, and smell, and the karmindriyaha, the powers of action. And it's quite striking when we look at these powers of action, these karmindriyaha, how they also can be seen as distinguishing characteristics that we have as human beings. So first, at the top of this list, we've got Vak. Vak, its headquarters is said to be this region, the region of the throat, extending out into the arms. And Vak describes our capacities of speech and language and communication and expression. And we communicate not just with our voice, but also with our body and our arms. But this higher linguistic capacity is one of our distinguishing characteristics as human beings. And words and language have power. And yoga reminds us, if we want to come into the gathered, joined up, integrated state of yoga, then it's especially important to take great care with our speech. We've already mentioned that subhashita. When the thought, the word, and the action are all one, this is when our soul expands into its natural vastness. So strikingly, speech is in the middle between thought and action. Yoga always happens in the middle. So paying attention to our speech, am I speaking the truth? Am I speaking appropriately? Is what I say necessary, helpful? Is it the expression of my deeper longing? Where am I speaking and acting from? Taking care with our speech can be a tremendously potent way to practice in all aspects of life. But coming back to the karmindriyaha, the first of our action capacities, speech, communication, language, expression. Then we have pani, and this refers to our manual capacities. So as humans, we have these opposing thumbs. We are a species that can wield and fashion tools. And just like our capacity to communicate, our manual and dexterity has been extraordinarily instrumentally important in our ascent to the top of the food chain. Because compared to many other species, we're not that potent in the physical realm. Next capacity, pada, locomotion. If we put ourselves next to many animals, we're rather slow. We're not so strong. We're not so powerful. But one of the distinct things about human movement capacities is that we are very diverse movers. We can, well, of course, we're also bipeds. This is one thing that distinguishes us. So we can walk and run long distances better than most animals. And that was an important part of how we hunted back in the day. And in some parts of the world still now. But as movers, we cannot swim as well as the fish or the seals, but we can navigate the watery realm with a little bit more ease than a fish or a seal can navigate the earth. We can't climb as well as a monkey, but we can still climb a little bit. We can't run as fast as a cheetah, but we can still run. So we have many diverse movement capacities. Now, something striking here, speech and expression, the capacity to shape and form, to pick things up and put things down. Our hands, Pani doesn't just mean we can pick up and put down physical things. We can also pick up and put down those most dangerous things called ideas and beliefs. And once we've picked up an idea and got attached to it, it can sometimes be rather difficult to set it down. But the practice of yoga can actually help us do that. So yoga practice works with these capacities, and that's why I'm spending a little bit of time just looking at these ideas now. Also, in our karmendriyaha, we have payu and upasta. So payu refers to the whole realm of our digestive, assimilative, excretory, eliminative capacities. And this is also super significant from the yogic perspective. Just because things have been a certain way up to now does not mean they have to stay that way. We can let go of things we no longer need. This is an innate capacity we have. And similarly, upasta. We have the capacity not just to procreate, but also to recreate. As human beings, we have a recreational capacity. Some people have described us as homo ludens. We are the species that loves to play. We like games. And I think if you go to a conventional school, the most important part of the school day is what is known in French as la récréation, or el recreo in Spanish, or la recreación in Italian. It is the recreation time. In other words, play time. Because what happens when we play? We create some rules, and within the confines of those rules, we have to be creative. And when we play, we do things that we would never otherwise perhaps do. So when a child is playing, that child will move in ways they've never moved before. And in so doing, new synaptic connections will be stimulated through the neurology. And this will allow the brain to expand towards its truer potential. One of the tragic things in the world today is that many of us don't have a big play quotient in our lives. But anytime we play, we are actually inviting ourselves to recreate our understanding of who we really are. And this is also foundational to the yogic vision. Atha. Now I recognize I am not established in the state of yoga and I'd like to do something about it. Well, this tattvas and gunas map gives us a practical reference to work with. How can I come into greater wholeness? How can I come into greater cohesion? I will have to join up and integrate all of these members of the gang of my being. So when we look at this map, we've talked already about the Panchamahabhuta, these basic building blocks of existence, the Tanmatraha, those aspects of existence that we experience and see through our sense and action powers. Then towards the top of the sheet, we have the Antakarana, the internal instrument of Manas, that part of our internal awareness that links the input that comes through our Indriyaha, our sense and action powers, to our internal understanding of ourselves and reality. Then we have this principle called ahankara. Now, aham means I, and kara, maker, the I maker. Sometimes people translate the ahankara as ego, like das Ich of Freud. And this is not so different. However, the ego is not usually used to refer to all of the things that ahankara is, because ahankara is also the intelligence that holds together all of these different cells in this amazing conglomeration of the human body. It is the intelligence that allows us to have this sense of I. Now, ultimately, we want to go beyond our limited sense of I and remember the vastness of our underlying essential nature. But the idea in yoga is this bodily incarnation, this human incarnation, is the vehicle in which we can experience that infinite creative capacity and potential of the source consciousness, of the pure consciousness that we have emerged from, that we are part of. And the other aspect of the antakarana, buddhi, that which discerns, the subtlest layer of our awareness. And in the yogic vision, there's the idea that if we can bring all of these different members of the gang of our being, all of these different tattvas, into togetherness, into oneness, then the buddhi, that subtlest aspect of our individual awareness, it can become such that it's no longer so distorted or colored or tinted by all these different inputs. And instead, it can allow us to experience the underlying source consciousness, which is illuminating all our experience of the things outside that come and go. So, when the Yoga Sutra begins, Atha Yoga Anushasanam, one of the things we can understand with this Atha is that we have a sense that there is an experience of congruence, of cohesion, of feeling at one, at peace, at home, that is deeper than our typical day-to-day experience. And this is one of the things that propels us towards the study of yoga. Other connotations of Atha. Now I know that money and power and fame or whatever it might be is not going to bring me the deep satisfaction that is really my deepest longing. Now I'm ready to explore ultimate reality. Now I'm ready to examine myself more searchingly. Now I'm ready to stop looking outside so much and journey within. This Atha has many other very important significances. Just a couple that I will touch on today. Atha and now, this is also signifying from Patañjali. He says Atha Yoga Anushasanam. Anu means following. Shasana, the instruction of yoga. So now the instruction of yoga will follow. Patanjali tells us what he's going to do. He's going to tell us about yoga. But the way he phrases this makes it clear that he is not the originator, the creator of yoga. He is following a tradition that has already been established. The teachings, the principles encoded in the distilled form of the sutra, they have already been proven in the furnace of time. And the way Patanjali sets them forth in this Vishwatomukam way that that makes the sutras like lighthouses that can guide our path wherever we find ourselves. He's building on a practice that has been refined and distilled over many, many generations. The principles have been put to the test and they stand. And this is one of the reasons why the Yoga Sutra is still studied today. Texts only stay alive if they have something of value and practical import. As I mentioned earlier, I was born in England. The English language didn't even exist when the Yoga Sutra was set down in Sanskrit, more or less 2,000 years ago. Scholars have their different perspectives on exactly when the sutra was set down, but we'll leave that aside. They all agree that it's a long time ago, at least approaching 2,000 years. Now, most books that get published, they're forgotten within a decade. The books that stay appreciated and relevant over centuries, that only happens when they have something very relevant, very practical, very helpful in them. So in the English language, for example, there's not a lot of literature that has stayed alive for more than 100 years. But that which does, let's consider Shakespeare, for example. If we look at one of Shakespeare's most treasured plays, perhaps the most treasured play, Hamlet, in Hamlet, we find it's so relevant. 400 years after it was written, it's still telling us so many perennial truths about the human condition. And so this is why, from a certain perspective, we might describe a Shakespeare play like Hamlet with the Sanskrit term Purana. It is perennially valid. It is ancient but always fresh. It is set once upon a time in the ever new now, Atha and now. So the teachings that are given in the Yoga Sutra, they're not for any particular time or place. They're for now, the ever new now. And yoga begins now, again and again. This Atha is not a one-off affair. And now I realize I'm not as established in yoga as I'd like to be. Let me take recourse to Patanjali's beautifully practical text to help me invite this greater cohesion into the field of my experience. Yoga practice is not a one day, one weekend, 1 month affair. Yoga practice is a lifelong journey. After Patanjali tells us, now I'm going to tell you about yoga, in his second and third sutra, Patanjali gives a definition of yoga that I would describe by the word polyvalent, meaning it has multiple layers of valid meaning. This classic definition is yogaha citta vritti nirodha. So yoga is the nirodha of the vrittis of the citta. What does that mean? Now, people have spoken at great length about this sutra. And the word citta, chit, we've already mentioned, means consciousness. Citta can mean different things in different contexts. And in some contexts, it refers to the antakarana, to the buddhi, the ahankara, and the manas. Sometimes people talk, it's the whole realm of that which is computed, processed, experienced by our subtle internal mental apparatus. But on this yellow sheet, you'll notice that I've put citta to encompass not just the realm of the antakarana, but also all of the experiences, all of the things that move through our consciousness. So chit, conscious, citta, that which is experienced through our consciousness. Because all of these different instrumental powers and that which we experience through them, they impact the realm of our experience. They impact and influence our sense of who we are and what is real. So Patanjali's definition of yoga, citta vritti nirodha, it's the state when the vrittis, the movements, the turnings, the whirlings of all of those things that pass through our awareness are nirodhat. Now this word nirodha, we mentioned already when we looked at the definition of a sutra. The sutras should be clear and unambiguous, and yet at the same time, because they're vishvatomukha, they can have multiple simultaneously valid layers of meaning. So nirodha can mean stopping or suspending. And in the ultimate state of yoga, it is altogether real that all thoughts subside and the field of awareness is clear. However, this definition that Patanjali offers us is not just of the ultimate state of yoga. It's a polyvalent description. This is also a description of the type of yoga that we cultivate along the path of practice. So I like to think of nirodha as checking. Yoga is not just the ultimate state in which all the movements, cyclings, pulsations of our awareness subside. It's also that state in which we're cultivating greater awareness of the cycles and pulsations of all those things that move through the field of our awareness. So one way we could interpret this sutra is yoga is when we check all of the movements of our awareness. Now this word vritti, it's also important to mention, I think. If I were to ask a person, where do you live? And that person told me, I live in Mysore, then we might say, Saha, that person, Mysore Nagare, Vartate. That person Vartate, Vrits, that person Vrits in Mysore. Krishika Vartate, he works as a farmer, he tends the fields. That's what he vrits. So vrit, it means to live, it means to work, it means to act. And the yogic rishis, they understood, they recognized life is pulsation. Life is a cycle. If you like, you can do this with me. Use one hand to draw a circle in space. And then with the other hand, start making this gesture of pulsation. This is life. It is a breath cycle. It is a heartbeat. If it's easy, change hands. Life is cycling. It is vritting. Now, Patanjali is not anti-life. The Yoga Sutra is a means to live a full and satisfying life. Yoga is very pragmatic. In the second chapter, Patanjali will tell us a very beautiful thing, distilling the idea of the Purushartha, the aims of a human existence. Patanjali will tell us the purpose of the seen manifest existence is Boga and Apavarga. Boga is to be relished, enjoyed, and learned through, so we can go beyond it. We won't go beyond it by ignoring it or repressing it. No, we have to allow ourselves to taste it and work with the nature of reality. So, yoga citta vritti nirodha, let us beware of translations that seem like yoga means stopping life or stopping thought. Eventually that might happen. But in the meantime, can we become more aware of the habitual ways that our thoughts and our associations tend to move? Patanjali tells us when we come to that citta vritti nirodha state, when we come to the state of yoga, tada drashtuhu svrupevasthanam. Then what happens? How do we recognize the state of yoga? We have the experience of the seer, of that conscious essence that is underlying all our experience. We get a glimpse of who we really are. That Satchit Ananda, that Satchirita Brihat, that vastness. The essential nature of the seer, of that which is underlying and enabling all our experience, becomes established, and we can taste it, recognize it, if only for a moment. Otherwise, Patanjali tells us, the rest of the time, what's happening? If our essential nature is Satchit Ananda, is the essence of pure consciousness, why are we not experiencing it all the time? Vritti sarupyam itaratra. At other times, in other situations, our awareness becomes as if localized. And it becomes identified with what we're getting locally caught up with. Now, how many ways can our awareness get caught up at the local level? Infinite ways. In his jaw-dropping genius, Patanjali distills those infinite ways into 5 categories. He says we could be seeing something at the local level in an accurate way, and we're getting involved in that, or we could be misperceiving something. Classic example being the snake and the rope. We see a snake-like object, and the adrenal response is very real. But then the snake-like object isn't moving. And we realize, oh, that's not what it was. It's not a snake. It's just a creeper or a stick that looks a bit like a snake. We thought it was one thing, and then we realized it wasn't. Misapprehension. And this doesn't just refer to physical objects. We can have, for example, the experience as a human being, it's my salvation. Only to realize, no, that's not my salvation. That's just something that wants my attention. So in the Samskrita, it might be helpful. I'll put this in the chat. I think, it's been shared with you. You have the Yoga Sutras PDF already in the chat. But I'll bring it on screen just so it might be easier to follow. So Patanjali says, Vritti sarupi mitaratra. Other times, other places, our awareness becomes identified with what it is becoming locally connected to or identified with. And these connections, these localizations, have 5 forms. Vrittaya panchataya klishta klishtaha. Now this 5th sutra, one thing that's very significant to mention here, Patanjali says these vrittis, these vrittaya in the plural, they can be klishta or aklishta. They can afflict us or they can be not afflicting. In other words, they can get in the way of the experience of yoga or not. In other words, vrittis are not good or bad. They just are. Nonetheless, they can get in the way of yoga or not. And how we can work to overcome these things that get in the way is what Patanjali is going to tell us how to do in a very practical way. So very briefly, he describes these 5 classifications of the vrittis. We've got pramana, seeing things as they are, viparya, seeing things as they're not, vikalpa, the whole realm of association based on language. For example, we might hear, like today, for example, I am in Tiruvannamalai. Now, if somebody has spent time in Tiruvannamalai, if they hear that word, that name, they might feel certain types of emotion. Somebody who's never been here, they might have the same effect, but just the word triggers this type of association. And this is vikalpa, the whole realm of association based on language that includes fancy and imagination and daydream. Nidra, the 4th of these 5 vrittis, is the state in which it's as if awareness is absent, like in sleep. Or it can happen in an apparently waking state. I hope it's not happened to you during the course of this presentation, where it's as if we're absent. We just checked out. We were spaced out for a moment. And the 5th is smriti, meaning memory. Anubhuta vishaya sampramosha smritihi. Rather than being here now, we are remembering, we are recollecting. Things from the past have not left us. They are still with us. And so Patanjali very succinctly describes this very human reality. We feel anxiety over the future. We feel sorrow and regret over the past. And what this does is it disperses our awareness and impedes us from being fully here in the vast fullness of who we really are. But this vast fullness of who we really are, it's our home. It's where we came from. And deep down, the longing to return to that is motivating all our efforts as human beings. One thing that's sometimes said within the tradition is that everybody is practicing, whether we realize it or not. And there's Atha at the beginning of the text. Now I realize I'd actually like to expedite that process home. And now, having told us of the countless ways that our awareness can get dispersed through these 5 broad categories, Patanjali now, in Sutras, from Sutra 12, begins to offer us the practical remedy for this situation of being dispersed and fragmented. And he tells us that the method to bring about the nirodha of those vacillating, fluctuating movements that tend to scatter and disperse our awareness and get in the way of our experience of the wholeness that we really are underneath everything else, the means is twofold. Abhyasa, Vairagya, Bhyam. So this Bhyam is significant. It means by both of these things, by first Abhyasa and then the consequent Vairagya. Patanjali has introduced 2 new terms, Abhyasa and Vairagya. And here we notice Patanjali's beautiful style. He introduces an important term and then straight away he elucidates it, makes it very clear and very practical. What is Abhyasa? Tatra, there, amongst those 2, Abhyasa and Vairagya. Stitau yatno Abhyasa. Abhyasa is the yatna, the effort, stitau, for the sake of steadiness. Yoga practice is the effort to foster and cultivate steadiness. Yoga practice is the effort to foster and cultivate steadiness. So does that mean yoga practice has nothing to do with standing on one's head or sitting in meditation or doing all sorts of breathing exercises? Every yoga technique is intended to foster steadiness and integration of awareness. So yoga practice is not the techniques. The techniques are intended to facilitate practice the rest of the time, because the arena for yoga practice is all of life, as the next sutra makes clear. So Patanjali in the 13th sutra tells us, practice is the effort to foster steadiness. And he develops the definition of practice. Satu, and furthermore, dirghakala, long-term, nirantarya, uninterrupted, satkara, attended to with real true presence, asevita, and a spirit of dedication and devotion, dhrida bhumihi, then that practice will become well rooted. well grounded, so it can actually grow. Everything grows from its roots. So as we practice yoga, and as when we work with yoga technique, sometimes we can experience this sense of elevation and ascension. It's always, that's the easy part. The real work happens in integrating that elevated subtle experience back into the root system of our being, so it can start to permeate all of our experience and become woven deeper and deeper into the fabric of our being. So rather than our sense of ourselves being tinted, colored by all these forces of whirling change in the material realm that come and go, our understanding of who we really are starts to be permeated more deeply with the quality of that deep oneness that is underlying and enabling all of the experience, the wonderful experience of this realm of diversity and change and beauty all around us. So practice is the effort to foster steadiness, and yoga practice is long-term, without interruption, wholehearted, dedicated. In other words, when is yoga practice? All the time. What is yoga practice? Everything we do. And how do we know if it's really yoga practice? Well, Vairagya is the effect of Abhyasa, the effect of practice. Sometimes Vairagya gets translated as dispassion or non-attachment. And if a person chances upon a translation of the Yoga Sutra and hasn't really looked at it in context, they might say, wait a minute, this seems a bit of a contradiction. Patanjali is telling us we need to do it all the time without interruption, with wholehearted, dedicated effort. And now we've got to be non-attached. That doesn't seem to make sense. If you're going to do something with so much assiduous devotion, you need to be attached to it, no? Yes, yes, yes. But wait, what does Patanjali say? First Abhyasa, and then Vairagya. What is Vairagya? Drishtanushravika vishaya vrishnasya vashikara sangya vairagyam. So Vairagya is the state of, relatively speaking, disinterest in the things that come and go. Drishta, the things you've seen and previously experienced. Anushravika, the things you haven't yet experienced but you've heard about. Maybe you heard about a beautiful place that your friend's been. You want to go there. Or they had this amazing recipe. You want to taste it. Or you've heard about some otherworldly state of transcendent meditative absorption that your friend experienced. You want to go there. Patanjali says Vairagya is the state where all of those things that come and go, they no longer have the same grip over you. They no longer hold the same allure. Why not? Not because I'm a yogi, so no chocolate for me. Not because I'm repressing or denying or suppressing the desire to experience beauty and all of that. No, because there's the Vashikara Sanya, because I know that the richness of absorption in my essence is so far beyond anything that I could ever get from these external things that come and go. Notice the word here, Drishthanushravika Vishaya. So Vishaya means objects that we have anushravika, heard from others about or heard tell of. Drishta, that we've experienced or seen for ourselves. Vitrishna. Trishna. Mama Trishna Masti. I want to drink. I have thirst. Vitrishna, thirstless. Who is thirstless? The person who is full. So yoga practice means cultivating steadiness, but it also means cultivating fullness. In other words, bringing all of those tattvas, all of those gunas, all of those members of the gang of our being into togetherness. So our experience becomes its own completion. And when that happens, we don't thirst for anything else. So yoga practice, one way we can understand it practically, means doing whatever we are doing with all of ourself, authentically, cultivating that cohesion between our thought, our word, and our action. And we can ask ourselves, where am I acting from? Is this the expression of my deeper conscience? Is this the expression of my heart? Or have I become corrupted? This word corruption, it's a word that we hear in many contexts, but look at the root of it, rupture. Cor means the heart, el corazón in Spanish, le cœur in French. Cor, the core, yes? Corruption is when there is a rupture from the core intelligence of our being. The core intelligence of our being that is one with the intelligence of life itself, life that knows how to live, life that is the spirit of existence. Now, sometimes people describe the Yoga Sutra as a spiritual teaching, and I think that's a very valid thing to say. But sometimes in the world today, one can come across human beings who say things like, well, I'm not a spiritual person, it's not for me. I say, what do you mean? Are you sure? Because I would suggest, as long as you are breathing, you are a spiritual being. Inspiration, expiration. This is life. There is no life without the spirit, and you cannot kill the spirit. The spirit goes on, and life knows how to live. So anytime as human beings, in our hubris, in our arrogance, in our fear, we try to suppress and dominate and control life, we are bound to lose, because life knows how to live, and life will not just find a way, it will find many, many ways. So Abhyasa does not mean to try to dominate or to control the movements of life and our awareness. It means to give all of the powers of our awareness this most satiating, satisfying experience of coming together in oneness and wholeness. And this means we don't necessarily need fancy techniques. If we practice cleaning the floor, with every part of ourself participating, perhaps that otherwise perceived as mundane tasks can become the portal to an experience of joy, bliss, and the infinite. For example, I'm cleaning the floor. This happened to me in Mysore. So I used to live in Mysore for many years, and Mysore during the dry season, there's a lot of the four-letter D word, a lot of dust. So there I am. In the first year I was living in Mysore, I couldn't believe it. I would clean the floor and it would be super clean. I go to bed and the next morning, it's already dusty again. Where's it come from? And I rather begrudgingly set about the floor cleaning in my first year living there. And I was also teaching a course on Bhagavad Gita and the yoga of action. And I thought, wait a minute, James, this is not sensible. Living in this place, this beautiful apartment, this beautiful space in which I can also get on with my studies and share classes on the Bhagavad Gita. It's part and parcel of living here. They have to clean the dust. It is inevitable. And as Krishna tells us in the Bhagavad Gita, when something's inevitable, don't lament it. Don't waste your energy complaining. Instead, direct your energy towards a solution. Use your energy so it fosters harmony and cohesion and balance and integration. So I thought, this floor cleaning is going to be part of my life as long as I live here. So can I transform the floor cleaning into a yoga exercise? And so as I am dry mopping, I can feel my karmendriyaha involved. I can work with my jnanendriyaha, my sense powers of action, and my sense powers of perception and my action powers of doing, and I can invite them all to the party of cleaning the floor, if that makes sense. So rather than feel, oh, this is a drudge, this simple act of doing the housework becomes an opportunity to practice being more fully in this present moment with all the miraculous powers of my conscious bodily vehicle online, collaborating, working as a unit. And when that happens, there is the possibility that in this field of manifest worldly existence, we can experience all of these instrumental powers working as a unit, working as one. And when that happens, excuse me, I'm trying to find something on the screen and I've just lost you all. Where is it gone? Zoom. Excuse me. Oh, I want to come back to yeah, there we go. I was just looking for my yellow sheet. It seems to have disappeared. But anyway, I will bring it back up here. And here it is. Yeah. So then I can share this one again. There it is. So the experience of yoga, practicing yoga, if I bring all of these instrumental powers of my indriyaha if I bring them all together in whatever I'm doing, then maybe I can experience life as a more harmonious experience. I can actually transform the battlefield in which I feel torn, in which I feel split, in which I feel dissonance, into a dance floor in which I feel harmony, and I can move through life as a beautiful symphony. But this will take practice. This is not going to happen overnight. This is going to be something that requires this constant, steady effort. So Patanjali tells us practice is a long-term, wholehearted, whole system engagement for the sake of cultivating steadiness. But we know if we're really practicing, because that steadiness has the effect that the things that come and go, the things that pull us away from our center, the things that fragment us, that disperse our energy, they start to have less of an influence on us. They don't pull us out so easily. Now, in the world we live in, there are so many factors that bombard, so many things are inundating our awareness and inviting our awareness to be dispersed. And this seems to be getting more and more acute as the years go by. These days, people often have a phone that has a feed, and it's like we're being stuffed. We're overfed. And when you're overfed, what happens to your capacities? They get dull. They're not so keen. We're not going to be able to experience our essence when we feel dull and bloated. We want to be in that sweet spot where we feel nourished and present, when there is engagement and relaxation. Now, I'm looking at the time and I'm realizing I'm not as far along as I'd hoped to be at this point in the proceedings. So a couple of things I'd like to suggest about the practicality of what Patanjali offers us. We've noticed that practice is something we can cultivate all the time. It's the effort to foster steadiness, and we can cultivate this steadiness by steadily, wholeheartedly inviting all parts of ourselves into what we're doing. And this is how we cultivate yogic presence. So in the 17th Sutra, Patanjali describes how yoga works, harnessing our natural human tendency for curiosity. We recognize I have the tendency sometimes to get dispersed. My awareness can wander in many different directions. So yoga says, give yourself an object. Use that object to gather all the powers of your senses, all the powers of your awareness. Let them all gather around this object and direct your attention to it. It could be an experience like the movement of the breath or bodily sensation, experiences of prana. It could be an internal mantra, an internal visualization, for example. Patanjali goes on to give us a whole ocean of examples in a very distilled form later in the chapter. But whatever the alambana, the support is, that becomes a mechanism with which we can gather and center all the different powers of our awareness. They come together. Let's just say, for example, we are observing the movements of the breath through the body, for example. As we start to observe the breath, what do we start to notice? We start to notice more. When we tune into something, it starts to open up, it starts to reveal more of itself. And this stimulates our curiosity further. So vitarka is this natural human curiosity. We harness it. As we begin to get absorbed in the object, we move to the realm of vichara, a subtler, more internal inquiry. And as that subtle inquiry continues, this amazing thing can happen. We can get an experience of ananda because we become absorbed in the object. As we become absorbed in the object, we have this feeling of wholeness. There's nothing of the past or no regret of the past, no anxiety of the future weighing on our mind in that state of absorption. And we feel this blissfulness. And where do we feel it? We used an object to invite this cohesion. We used the object to help us concentrate. But when the awareness becomes concentrated, we're no longer making the effort to concentrate. We're no longer concentrating. We've become concentrated. We've become meditative. meditate, the medi-state. We've come to the state of being centered, gathered, integrated. And in that centered, gathered, integrated state, the object has served its purpose. It falls away for a moment, and we just experience the state of being at one. We relish the richness of presence and awareness and the seeing capacity that is at our essence. And this is accompanied by this feeling of wholeness, of completion. For a moment, we are beyond desires. And where do we experience this desirelessness? It's nothing outside ourselves. It's right here. And so then, asmita, this allows us to come to a recalibration of our understanding of who we are. Our sense of self changes for a moment, because the impression of samadhi imprints in all aspects of our being. And we recognize this fullness, it's not out there. It's actually a property that we can cultivate here inside. Now I'm just going to skip ahead to a few key ideas that I had planned to spend more time on. In order to cultivate this state of deep integrated awareness, in the 20th Sutra, Patanjali tells us we have to cultivate certain qualities: Shraddha, Virya, Smriti Samadhi, Prajna Purvaka Itaresham. So in the 19th Sutra, Patanjali is mentioned, there are some beings who just through their birth, they're absorbed they're born into a state in which they have relative ease of access to very absorbed states of awareness. Good for them. But Itaresham, for the rest of us, this state of deeper yogic awareness, it will be Purvaka, preceded by the cultivation of 4 qualities that help us come to a state of deeper prajna, of deeper intuitive awareness, of clearer perception. And these 4 qualities are Shraddha, Virya, Smriti, and Samadhi. Shraddha. This is the first quality that Patanjali mentions, and it often gets translated as faith. But it's important to note that the English word faith does not reach its meaning out, does not point its meaning out in all the same directions as the Sanskrit Shraddha. I like the way that Eric Schiffman, a contemporary American teacher, describes Shraddha as self-trust. But etymologically, the Sanskrit Shraddha is related to the word hrit, heart. Shraddha is that faith, that confidence, that conviction that comes when we are not corrupted, when we are in rhythm with our own authentic nature, our svadharma, when we are pulsating and expressing ourselves as the beauty that is our innate deep capacity as a human being. Because this yoga, this bringing everything together, this going beyond division and fragmentation, this is not a superhuman thing. This is actually the real human capacity. Just consider a moment this amazing bodily vehicle. We mentioned already, it contains earth, water, fire, air, and space. Now, earth and water and fire, do they cohabit together very easily? If I go to the beach and I scoop up some water from the seashore, I pick it up in a glass. It looks clear, but then in a few seconds, the sandy particles all subside to the bottom. But I get up in the morning, it's not like the earth goes down and I'm this watery being. No, earth and water cohere in the bodily vehicle. If I put water over a fire, after some time, the water's going to evaporate. Or if I boiled the water, used it, and I have no more need of the fire, I might use the remaining water to douse the fire. So earth, water, fire, they don't cohere, they don't cohabit so easily. But look at this bodily vehicle. Earth, water, fire, and air, all cohabitating in this miraculous space. So we are, as we walk, breathe through life, the manifest demonstration that as human beings, we have an extraordinary innate capacity for yoga, to reconcile things that would seem perhaps impossible to reconcile. But we have this capacity to incarnate the beauty of this symbiotic, cooperative state that is demonstrated so beautifully by the gurus of the natural environment. But we have this capacity too. Various forces in human history have spun the false stories of separation and division and enmity. But really, we have this capacity for cohesion. And this is what happens when we reclaim our essential nature. And this is what yoga is all about. In order to do this, we have to cultivate shraddha. We have to cultivate the uncorrupted state in which we feel so confident, in which we have real faith in ourselves. This faith, however, is not about believing anything. It's the faith that comes from honest, heartful, genuine exploration in the arena of our own lives and practice. And sometimes people say, faith is easier to build than rebuild. And so as we practice, let us be steady. Let us be humble. Let us not try to go leaping over the ocean before we can take one step in front of the other. So we've already mentioned practice is a long-term, steady, it's a whole lifelong effort. If we want to cultivate self-trust, one way we can do it is by making promises to ourselves that we keep, by being impeccable with our word, by cultivating this cohesion of thought, word, and action. Patanjali tells we have to cultivate this shraddha, this confidence, and we need virya. Virya means the quality of a vira, a hero or a heroine in the feminine. But vira, as a Sanskrit word, it's so beautiful. It's also a word for a human being. The idea is this heroic quality is also an innate capacity of the human being. Where did we come from? We all come from the same place. We all come from the womb. And how was it in there? It was warm. It was comfortable. There was a constant, steady food supply. But somehow, even though it was all we'd known, something deep inside us said, there's more than this. It felt confined. We wanted to experience something vaster. And then what did? We did something truly heroic. We moved ourselves into a place of greater constriction, into the birth canal, to then make our way out into the breathing world of duality and change and pulsation and cycles. But when we made that great transition from the womb into the breathing world, we were initiated into the field of yoga. But we've already set the blueprint for yoga practice, going from the known, from the comfort zone, into the vaster reaches of reality. This can be an intimidating thing. I've not got as far as I was hoping to, so excuse me, but I wanted to talk about the barrier of yoga, the kleshas, the fear that flesh is heir to. When we come out of the womb, before very long, we start to get identified with this bodily vehicle, and it's a tenuous thing. One of the words in Sanskrit is tanum, for the body. It's tenuous, it's beautiful, it's powerful, it's a miraculous vehicle, but it's also very fragile. A human life is relatively short. And we look out and everything we experience is changing. So we get identified with change and limitation. And so our sense of self gets wound up with this tenuous, fragile thing. We feel some insecurity. And so what do? We develop a whole suite of allegiances, our preferences, things we like, things we don't like, and we cling to the known. We resist change. We fear death. These are the kleshas, those things that get in the way of yoga. What's the method to come out of them? We cultivate samadhi, integration, as best we can. We keep bringing all of ourselves into the present moment as best we can, and we act from there. And as we keep doing that with heroic valor, with the courage to go beyond the known, to shed all of these accretions and layers of limiting conditionings of I can't do this, or I'm only this, or oh no, it has to be like this. When we keep making the heroic effort to step into more of who we really are, we will bolster our self-trust. Our shraddha will grow. When we start yoga, often something is troubling us. Maybe we have a classic example. Somebody's got back pain. We start going to yoga classes. We start doing some asana practice. Back pain goes. How do we feel about yoga? Oh, I love yoga. I'm so grateful to have it in my life. But as we have healed an imbalance in the field of our being, we have sent a signal to our deeper intelligence. We're in the harmonization game. And now what will the system do in its deep innate wisdom? It will bring to the surface the next layer of imbalance that wants to be healed so we can experience more of that vastness that we really are. Except now, it's not the back pain that we were so conscious at the surface level of our awareness we wanted to be rid of. Now it's something deeper, something that had been hiding in the shadow lands of our being. And now that hoves up into awareness and we see something in ourselves we really don't want to look at. Oof. We'd rather not see it, but now we've seen it. What can we do about it? But what's happened? In that previous process of harmonizing one layer of our being and getting rid of the back pain, we've proven to ourselves that if we make the steady effort to foster steadiness and balance integration, it's worth it. So we've bolstered our virya, our courage, and our shraddha, our self-trust. And now we've got a bit of smriti, we've got a bit of memory of experience that it's worth making this effort. The effort to cultivate samadhi is worth it. And so we keep making that effort. And so this is how practice gets propelled. It's a self-validating effort. When we come into that cohesion, it's its own reward. I clean the floor and it's drudgery and I feel miserable. I decide, no, I'm going to make it a mahotsava, a celebration of being incarnate with consciousness. And then I clean the floor and I feel great. It's worth making the effort to shift my attitude to one of gratitude that facilitates greater presence and allows me to drink deeper from the cup of life. Because if I drink deep from the cup of life, will I be thirsty? No. So yoga doesn't mean running away from life. It means embracing it, drinking deep from the cup of life so I come to that state of fullness and completion here now. This is the opportunity of a human life. Now, I've only got about halfway through the things I was planning to speak about today, but I'm conscious that we're coming towards the advertised ending time. So I think I'll pause there and just check in with Nitin and the team there.
Yes, MG. I think if you want, you can take another 5 minutes and conclude.
Okay.
Yeah, so that you
So
can conclude properly.
yes. So thank you. So as well as the 20th sutra, so there's a 3 more ideas I was really that were on the kind of lesson plan. I'll just say I'm used to talking about this material when I can see people responding, and it took me a bit longer to get things set up than I anticipated. So excuse me, but the other thing that I would like to mention, I talked earlier when we were looking at the definition of a sutra about places in the text where we might see syllables that seem superfluous, or the language is doing something that, if we're paying close attention, is making something very clear, but we could miss it at first glance. And so this one example of this is Sutra 33 in the first chapter, which I would describe as the essential or compulsory yoga practice. Patanjali has told us yoga is that state where we come into togetherness. At other times, our awareness gets dispersed and fragmented. The method that yoga deploys harnesses our innate curiosity as human beings and deploys the innate powers of our awareness in a way that doesn't fight against nature, but works with it so we can actually experience the inner richness of inviting ourselves more fully into togetherness. But as we proceed along that path, we're going to have shraddha, faith and virya, courage, heroic valor, because as we get in the harmonization game, we're going to encounter deeper and more intimidating challenges. When we cultivate steadiness, that steadiness, the classic image that's used in the tradition is like our awareness is like a lake. And ordinarily, when we're very busy in our day-to-day life, the surface of the lake gets very perturbed. When we cultivate yoga, it's like we bring this stillness to the surface layer. So now we can see into the depths, but in the depths we see what? Oh, wow, there's all sorts of trash buried down there. oh, and there's a whole subaqua cave network, and it's full of dragons. And there's all of these things in our psyche that need to be harmonized. And that can be rather intimidating. So steadily we keep cultivating self-trust. Now, one of the ways that we can do this is through the principles that are encoded in this beautiful Sutra 33. So in this stage of the first chapter, Patanjali is going in deeper on how to practice yoga. And he's told us we want to cultivate oneness, clarity of awareness, steadiness of awareness, clarity of awareness. In Sutras 34 to 39, these sutras distill a whole ocean of options for meditation practice technique. And you'll notice each of these sutras contains the particle va, meaning and or as well, in addition, optionally. But in Sutra 33, there's no va. And this basically means this is the essential practice. This is the practice you have to do. It's non-negotiable. What does it say? Maitri karunamuritopekshanam sukha dukkha punya punya vishayanam bhavanatis chitta prasadanam. So to cultivate this prasadana, this clarification of chitta, of all the lenses of our awareness, Patanjali tells us there's 4 ways to be in response to 4 types of situation we can encounter in life. Sukha, when we're in an agreeable space, a good situation, a pleasant situation. Maitri, be open, be friendly. In order to be friendly to somebody or something, we have to be present. Yeah, we have to be open, including to the unexpected gifts of life. I don't know about you, but sometimes, for example, life has given me something beautiful, but I pushed it away because I think, oh no, I've got to do this. I'm not being friendly to life when I'm like that. So maitri, friendliness, when things are agreeable. But things aren't always agreeable. We're not always in a sukham, good space. Sometimes we're in a dukkam, a difficult space. When we're in a difficult space, when there is suffering, karuna, Patanjali advocates, be compassionate. When we see people doing wonderful things, punya, Patanjali says, mudita, let it fill you with joy, let it inspire you, let it lift you up. Now, imagine you live your life like that, and you live in a neighborhood where everybody lives like that. When things are agreeable, we're warm, friendly, hospitable, open, present. When there is difficulty and suffering, we are compassionate. When we see people doing wonderful things, we let it fill ourselves with joy and inspiration. Then what happens if we encounter apunya, when we see terror and horror? We will be fortified to be able to be equanimous, upeksha, to be steady, to not get overwhelmed by that situation, be able to meet it from a steady center so we can respond in the most skillful way possible. So this is Patanjali's basic recipe for how to act in the world. When things are agreeable, be friendly. When things are challenging or difficult, where there's suffering, be compassionate. Where there is beauty and virtue, let it lift you up, celebrate it. When there is horror, when there is terror, be steady, be equanimous. Then, chitta prasadana. This is the means to clarify the lenses of your awareness. Now, this sutra is not just a prescription of how to practice. It is also a description of the person who is established in yoga. If, whenever things are agreeable, I'm always friendly and open. If, whenever I encounter suffering, compassion just spontaneously, naturally overflows. If, whenever I see beauty and wonderful things, I feel full of joy. There's no trace of envy or feeling like, oh, I'm inadequate in comparison, anything like that. And when I encounter terrible things, I don't feel overwhelmed by fear, or I'm not shaken, I'm not despondent. I'm able to stay steady and see it as if from a high vantage point. In some old translations of Yoga Sutra, this word upeksha often gets translated as indifference, but it's important to note that is the 19th century meaning of indifferent, meaning it doesn't make a difference to your center. It doesn't mean not caring. It means staying steady. So in this sutra, the absence of the particle va, which is even the next sutras, tells us this is not optional. This is what you have to do. And this is also telling us this is how we will be when we are established in yoga. If it's not the case that I'm spontaneously always responding in these ways, then it'll be very helpful for me to take recourse to meditative technique, and that is encoded in the next sutras. Then in the second chapter, the way of yoga practice is elaborated and expanded. And this is one of the other things that I have not got to that I would have liked to. And this is when Patanjali introduces the yamas. And in Sutra 31 of chapter 2, Patanjali describes them as the Mahavrata, the great vow. He says, Jati Desha Kala Samayana Vachina Sarvabhauma Mahavratam. And what this means is, so he's described the yamas, these behavioral principles, and he says they're the Mahavrata. Now, with these 4 syllables, Mahavrata, it means they're the great vow. We've already said sutra means ultra condensed. We're using the minimum number of syllables. If something is Mahavrata, it means it's super important. But Patanjali also says Sarva Bhauma Mahavratam, all times, all places, all situations. Jati Desha Kala Samayana Vachinna, Sarva Mahavratam, regardless of the situation you find yourself in, regardless of the conditions of your birth, the fashions of the time, anything like that, you always cultivate the yamas. So here, Patanjali has used not just 4 syllables, Mahavratam, but Jati Desha Kala Samayana Vachinna Sarva Bhauma Mahavratam, 21 syllables. Why? Not because he's using anything superfluous, because he's emphasizing. If we want to cultivate Chitta Prasadana, the yamas are our friends. Not seeing you respond, I feel I haven't kind of got to some of the key points I wanted to get to, but I hope that in what we've shared today, it's opened up some of the practical application of these teachings that Patanjali distills. So thank you for listening today, and thank you for hosting, Nitin.
Thank you. Thank you very much, James. Thank you very much for a very wonderful, very interesting presentation on Yoga Sutra. Viewers, if you have any questions, we'll just quickly take 1 or 2 questions. Please post it in Q&A box. I will just wait for 2 minutes and see if there are any questions. Uh, I really loved what you mentioned. Sutra is very super short, but it is also very extensive. So the shorter it is, more deeper it is. So it has been a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Uh, and uh, I had one question I wanted to ask you.
Yes.
When we speak about the Ashta Angas of the yoga,
Mm.
most of the times in contemporary practice, when we speak of yoga, mostly what comes to mind is the asana part.
Mm.
And what is often more stressed is also asana, and to
Mm.
some extent pranayama and dhyana. But the limbs which come first
Yes.
are yama and niyama.
Mm.
And somehow it appears to me that yama and niyama are the foundation without which the other things are, if the yama and niyama are not in place, then other things are merely like a pack of cards
Yes.
without the foundation. So please share your thoughts on this.
Yes, thank you, Nitin. This is actually where I'd hoped to culminate today, because I was hoping to get to after introducing Sutra 33. The way I understand it, yama is basically an elaboration of how we can cultivate Maitri Karuna Mudita Upeksha, how we can maintain Chitta Prasadana. Because as you've suggested, Nitin, if we do any other practice, but we're not actually cultivating ahimsa, the first of the yamas, then it's not really going to bring steadiness and clarity. So the way it was presented to me by my teacher, which I found it so beautiful, is like all of the 8 limbs, they are all members of the body of practice. But Patanjali is always very precise. And the first is yama. And as we just touched on at the end there, he says this is the Mahavrata. And it's Sarva Bhauma. On all grounds, this is the foundation. And we have ahimsa, satya, asteya, brahmacharya, parigraha. And we could easily spend many hours on each of them. But very briefly, one thing that I think is really helpful to remember often when we look at these in translation, we see ahimsa, asteya, aparigraha. We have this prefix which stands for na. So we often get a translation, ahimsa as non-harming or non-violence. That's correct, that's valid, but that's not the whole of what ahimsa means, because ahimsa is not a negative word. As Patanjali tells us in Sutra 31, these are things we observe all the time. So the yamas are things we do, they're not don'ts. So it's not just non-harming, it's that which is other than harming. So ahimsa means cultivating harmony, cultivating love. Asteya doesn't just mean don't steal. Of course, that's a significant part of asteya, but it also means be respectful. Aparigraha doesn't just mean not grasping, not coveting. It means, graha means to grab. Now, do we want to drink deep from the cup of life? Yes, we got to grab the cup, but can we grab it without tension? Can we loosen our grip? And then satya, yes, be honest, tell the truth, but also be authentic, be present. And brahmacharya, char, can we move in a way that takes us towards the experience of totality? Can we be very respectful of our energetic resources as human beings so we can move in a more cohesive state? And I would suggest, as I think you've also suggested there, Nitin, is that if we're practicing any yoga technique, whether it's asana, pranayama, whether we are reciting mantras, whatever it might be, if we're not cultivating harmony, ahimsa, we're not practicing yoga. We want to cultivate steadiness of awareness and clarity of awareness. And the yamas, as Patanjali makes super clear with those 21 syllables in Sutra 231, emphasizing the primacy of yama, we cannot really access the power of the other limbs unless they're built on the foundation of yama. So I would like to have spoken about that more in the presentation earlier, but thank you for that question.
I think we can have a separate talk. We would love to have it with you on the Yamana Yamas itself.
Yeah,
60 minutes or a 90 minutes talk like this, purely focused on that. Then you will have a more play field to explore each of them in more depth. And we look forward to that talk. And I'll get in touch with you on email. We'll fix up a date for that talk.
great. Thank you, Nitin. And based on today's experience, I can prepare with more, let's say, more experience about presenting just to this when I cannot see the people. So
Yes, yes, definitely.
I'd be very pleased to do that. Thank you.
Yes. It was a very wonderful session, very enlightening session, and we look forward to have you on our platform many, many more times in the future. Uh,
Thank you so much.
thank you very much.
Always an honor to be associated with Indica doing so many great things. So thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure to share with you today.
Thank you very much. Viewers, with this, we will conclude today's session. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter for updates about our upcoming programs. Thank you very much. Let me conclude with a prayer. Gurur Brahma, Gurur Vishnu, Gurur Devo Maheshwara, Gurur Sakshat Parabrahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha, Shri Gurubhyo Namaha, Hari Om. Okay, Namaste, James.
Namaste. Thank you.